Hey, it's Jeff with DaringDino.com. In this video, you will learn how to create light streaks in Blender. I'll cover how to use motion blur to create light streaks, how to create a hyperspace effect, and how to animate the motion blur through a Python script. So let's get into it right now. So what you're seeing here is the project file, which I'll be making available for free if you sign up for the Daring Dino newsletter at daringdino.com/newsletter. So the basics are pretty simple. The first thing we want to do is add an icosphere, so Shift A, and let's add a mesh, icosphere, and we can turn it down to 1 subdivision level. We're going to create an emission shader, so a new shader, and just change this over to be emission, and we can set this to be 5. Let's also add a camera, and clear the rotation with Alt-R, RX90, and GY, and move it back just a little bit, and then hit 0 on our number key to see what we're seeing here. And then what I'll do is animate the position of this icosphere just so that we can see exactly what's going on. So I'll use GX and move it out of frame, set 1 keyframe, hit I, and we'll just do the location. And then we'll go to frame 80, move it along the x-axis with G and X, and then press I again to add another location keyframe. So let's also copy this value here with Command C and paste it into the end. So if I hit Alt A to animate it, it will just be moving through the scene just like that. Now, if I render this out, it's going to look like a normal, very bad looking sphere kind of moving across the scene. But if I go into my motion blur, and I obviously have to enable motion blur, and then I turn the shutter up to a value like 5, and I'll just render this frame right here because it should have some motion blur. So I'll do that right now. You can see that it is way wider than it is when we're looking at it through the 3D viewport. So just to exaggerate this even more, let's scale this down quite a bit. And let's render that one more time. And now it's really obvious how this effect kind of works. And since we're using motion blur, it's also going to kind of fade it out at the beginning and the end, which is exactly what we want with this effect. So that's the basics. But how do we make that really interesting scene that we were looking at before? So I'm using this Millennium Falcon model by Chris Kuhn. It's a great model, but we're really just using one part of it. So let's jump into the scene that I already have set up where I have this model pulled in. So what I've done is I've brought in the Millennium Falcon model and added a camera so that we're in the cockpit and we're just looking through here. I've also added an area light so that it's kind of illuminating, and this is what it should kind of look like with that little light in the cockpit. Alright, so I've got my little icosphere here, and that's going to act as my particle, so I've named it particle. And then what we're going to do is add a really big cube. So let's Shift A, add a cube, and scale this way up. I like to do S100 to make it really big. So here's our Millennium Falcon. We need this to be a lot bigger. So let's go this way. And I'm just using S and my mouse to scale it. And then we really want to scale it up on the Y dimension because that's the direction that it's going to be traveling. So S, Y, and then just drag this way up. Cool. And then I also like to do Control A and just apply the scale just so that I don't accidentally do something weird there. What we're going to make this cube do is emit particles. So those particles are going to be our stars, and this is just an easy way to add a bunch of objects into our scene. So let's go over to particle system here. And let's also name this emitter, just so we know what it is. And let's make that new particle system. And for right now, let's just leave the number at 1,000. We would probably want to turn that way up in the future. Let's make the end at 1. And make the lifetime 300, which is way longer than we need. And we're going to emit it from the volume. What that's going to do is make sure that it's only coming from inside of our cube. And if you go back to the beginning with Shift and left arrow, it will redraw that so that we can kind of see what our particle system really looks like here. We don't want any physics, so we can just say no there, and we can collapse that. We don't want to render the emitter, and we do want to use an object for our particle. And we're going to use particle, so that's where it becomes really handy to have that. And you can see these are pretty small, which for this effect is actually okay, but let's turn the size up to around 1, just so we can see them for the tutorial here. There we go. So if I go back to my camera with the 0, I can see all these stars, and that's looking really, really good. So what we probably want to do is move this so that we get some light streaks going, and the hyperspace effect is caused by making it move very slowly at the beginning and then all of a sudden jumping up. So let's move this way forward here so that we're starting towards the back of our light field here and pressing I to set a location keyframe. And then we'll go to about frame 40 and move it back just a little with GY and move it just a little bit. And then I to insert another location keyframe. And then we'll go towards the end, and we'll go all the way to the end. And GY, move it all the way until we get around there. And then I to insert another keyframe. So if I hit Alt-A to play back, it will move very slowly and then go pretty fast, which is exactly what I want. All right, so just to fix the animation there a little bit, let's go into animation mode and let's look at the location of our emitter. And one quick tip is to hit the home key to see all your keyframes here. And we don't want this one to be easing out. So let's just rotate it with R and just rotate it so that at the end, it just kind of stops. And then if we jump back to our default view and hit Alt-A, it'll speed up. And then at the end, it'll just keep going full speed until the very end, which is exactly what we want. So I'm just going to save this really quick. All right, so to animate the motion blur, it's not something that you would really need to do ever, but for this effect, we do want to do it. So we want it to start at 1 and then go up once the hyperspeed effect is kind of taking place. But I can't keyframe this value. If I hover over this value and hit I get an error saying it cannot be animated, which makes sense. In normal situations, you don't need to animate this. However, I would find it very useful to have this feature specifically for this tutorial. But luckily, there is a very easy way to do it. So I'm going to split my view by clicking up in the top right corner here with my left mouse button and just dragging over, and then making this into a text editor. And I'm just going to use this script to make it something that I can animate myself. So what I need to also do is go into my scene tab here and go to custom properties and add, let me just delete this really quick, add one. I'm going to go to edit. The property name I'm going to call shutter, which this is specific to this variable right here. And then I'm going to make the maximum something like 10 and hit OK. And then let me just clear all my keyframes here as well, since I'm kind of using a scene that already had some stuff set up. So at the beginning, I do want this to be 5, or I do want this to be 1. So I'll just hit I to set a keyframe. And then once it starts moving, right before it starts moving, I want it to start going up. So let's insert another keyframe here, and then we'll add another one a few frames after, and we'll set this to be 5, and then hit I to hit another keyframe. So once I run the script, what it's going to do is it's going to say, get the scene shutter custom property, which is this guy, and set it to the motion blur shutter. And this is going to happen every time a frame runs. You don't really need to understand this. I actually found this on the Blender Stack Exchange site. I'll have a link to where I found it down below. And it's something that is very, very helpful for something that you can't animate. So let's run the script and Let's go back over here. And now my shutter value is 5, and if I move my cursor back along the timeline, you can see it changing to be 1, and then it's going up until it's 5, and then it's going to be 5 the whole rest of the time. And that's pretty much the whole effect. So I hope you learned a lot about creating light streaks in Blender. When you create a render with this method, feel free to let me know on Twitter at daring_dino or in the comments below. Don't forget, if you want to get free resources like this project file and great tutorials straight into your inbox, sign up for the Daring Dino newsletter at daringdino.com/newsletter and subscribe to this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.